First of all, I just want to start this off by thanking all of you who have recently come to this channel, subscribed, joined the Discord. I am thrilled. I'm overjoyed by this. I know it's still a small channel, but I was shocked by the response, the thoughtfulness of the comments and messages that I received on Discord, the comments in the YouTube video. Was shocking to me. I was in a pretty cynical state of mind when I made that video. I was thinking, oh, I don't know if what I'm saying is resonating or people aren't getting, and I'm not talking about subscriber count, because I assume if I keep at it, that'll come. I'm talking about the response to the video and the way it seemed to me that I had failed to overcome people's knee-jerk responses to, like, a 3-hour video about latency or whatever. And then the reaction to this last one, when I was just speaking kind of off the cuff and going over the testing, and I was kind of a poopy butt about it. I admit I was kind of upset that that I wasn't getting a reaction that I desired. It's selfish, I know, but that's what was going through my mind. And then I put this video out because one way or another, I had to get the testing out there. I'd worked really, really hard on this. I had to let people see the testing. I had to at least let people see the results. So I threw that video together and I put it out there. And the response just blew me away. I mean, you guys were amazing. I mean, I got the subscribers ticked up. I mentioned the Discord traffic, but it's not just, a few more subs. It's the thoughtfulness of the comments, and the people were describing to me issues that they were seeing in their systems. They're excited for the AMD content, and there was this exchange. And so the effect of that video was planting seeds of this community, which I've been trying to help foster the growth of a knowledgeable community that is interested in this architectural approach, this BIOS first approach, and curious people, and people who have fun with this hobby and who thirst for knowledge. And it was just, the response was overwhelming, and it just washed the cynicism right off of me. So I'm so happy with the reaction to that video, and that we've planted seeds and begun the growth of this community here. I want to take advantage of that. So I want to return to this subject of LatencyMon. I've never heard people talking about LatencyMon in this way, that it might be a stopgap for game crashes. Let me review the situation that I tested, and then I want to get into explaining it a little bit, and then I kind of want to put you guys to work. We have a little budding community now, and I need your help. I have my own findings, I have my own theories, but I can't make those theories viable in any way unless I have more information. It can't just be my testing. So I want to repeat these observations with you guys, share some developments of this theory, and then put it to you guys and see if you can find situations in your PC use where you can actually try this out. So to review what happened. So during the latency testing, I was getting crash. At a certain point, I started getting crashes in Warzone. And we talked about Warzone and how it can be a finicky engine. And these crashes were happening very suddenly. Black screen, and then hard crash, forcing a reboot, and not much useful data to be extracted from event viewer other than WHEA error, which we kind of know. And it doesn't tell you that hardware is the cause. It just tells you that the hardware failed, right? So what happened? So in order to find this out, I thought, well, I got to have some sort of logging. So I went down to play the game again, except I opened up hardware info and hardware info logging. And then I ran LatencyMon at the same time. Now, my thought was that hardware info could give me information about what my system is doing, and then LatencyMon could give me information about my drivers and my processes. And this would help me isolate the cause of the crash. There's some other software that you can use. This was my first pass, like my first attempt at trying to isolate this. And it failed. But it didn't fail because I couldn't figure out what was causing the crashes. It failed because I never crashed. Now, I'm talking over 4 and 5 hour sessions, because all of those numbers that I gave you, those MSPC latency numbers, it wasn't like one pass. It was like 10 or 12 or 15 at a time, and then averaged all of those out. So we're talking some long sessions here and no crashes at all with that logging and LatencyMon running in the background. And yet, later on, I fixed the crashes in a permanent way because I realized that it was a retention fault thing because my tREFI was too high. I was pushing tREFI too high like I usually do. And it was too high, and it was causing retention faults. And once I lowered tREFI to the last setting, 80,128, then I didn't get any more crashes. I wasn't running anything in the background. The crashes stopped. So we isolated the cause of those crashes and we fixed it. But I was running much higher tREFI values and not crashing with the logging running in the background. So that is the phenomenon that I noticed, and it naturally made me very curious. And so I wanted to explain that and then throw a thought experiment your way. So first of all, let's think about this ISR-DPC chain here, which I've mentioned in other videos, but just for review, you click your mouse, you press your keyboard, and this will trigger the USB controller, which then triggers the ISR, which cues the DPC, which writes the input buffer that the CPU reads. And LatencyMon does this in a synthetic way. So the first question is, how can this synthetic affect those other natural ISR and DPC loops? And the other thing is retention faults. Can LatencyMon really mask the retention faults that you'd get from a high tREFI? We talked about tREFI, and I'm always on about tREFI. So basically, your volatile memory stores its data in capacitance, which will leak. So DRAM cells leak because that storage is volatile, because it's dependent on the capacitance. And a capacitor is just something that, holds a charge for a bit. So if the cells don't get refreshed, the information is not retained. But the fault doesn't happen unless you try to read from that decayed cell, right? So how exactly does LatencyMon change, or how could LatencyMon change that timing window that might lead to retention faults? So ISR-DPC chain, let's talk about that one first, and then we'll get onto the retention faults. So we talked about the mouse click. Triggers the ISR. The ISR is fast, it's minimal. ISR's interrupt service routine. It does its work very quickly, and then it cues a deferred procedure call, a DPC. And the DPC will write to the input buffer, and then the game engine will pull that buffer, and then the input is registered. Okay, so that's ISRs, DPCs, game engine. That's how that chain works. Now, LatencyMon does that in a synthetic way. It's continuously triggering these ISRs and DPCs. It triggers a synthetic loop that's constantly running. And it keeps that core in a constant mode of servicing for interrupts. It's uninterrupted. Its interrupts servicing is uninterrupted. Even when, if in idle states are not affecting, it keeps on running this synthetic ISR DPC loop so that it can take its measurements. And the theory is that this forces a serialization of the natural interrupts behind the synthetic rhythm of LatencyMon. And then it would have effects on these other ISR and DPC routines that occur naturally, such as in terms of core residency, because we're preventing idle transitions, because these execution units are hot. They're constantly firing because the flow of the synthetic ISR and DPC loop that LatencyMon triggers is constant, and therefore serializes these other ones. And this potentially stabilizes driver behavior. But then we have this other aspect, that of the retention faults. If tREFI was too high before, and I was getting crashes, which we know now because once we lowered it, the crashes stopped, and yet I was able to game for multi-hour sessions with a value of tREFI that I now know was way too high to be stable, and yet I was able to game for 4 or 5 hours without this crashing, LatencyMon running in the background. Then that means there must be some sort of relationship between LatencyMon and these retention faults. But retention faults that's entirely resource bound. That's totally about your hardware. And LatencyMon, we know, is just about your scheduler. So what in the world could those two have to do with each other? Well, you got to remember, it's one thing to say, yeah, the cells aren't being refreshed, and this can lead to retention faults. But it's only going to lead to retention faults if you try to read from the decayed cell. So, DRAM stores data as charge in capacitors. Over time, that charge leaks. If you want a very, very quick 3-minute refresh, it's like my only example ever of brevity. I made a short, I'll stick it up here, and it's a short just about tREFI and how tREFI works, high level. So if the cell isn't refreshed in time, its data decays. Now, again, the fault only expresses itself when the system tries to read that decayed cell. So it's not the decay itself that's the danger, it's the timing of the read. So LatencyMon has a role in the read timing because it keeps a core occupied with predictable interrupt activity and forces natural ISRs and DPCs to queue behind its synthetic rhythm. And in this way prevents idle transition and interrupt collisions. And that rhythm can serialize system events, including memory reads. So in that way, it can influence the cause of retention faults in its shifting of execution timing and reducing concurrency in the system, forcing the reads to occur in a more orderly way. So let's say a DRAM cell is on the verge of retention failure. If a read hits it just before the next refresh, then the fault will express itself. If LatencyMon's rhythm delays that read by even a few milliseconds, then the cell gets refreshed before access, and that result would be no fault, no crash. So you didn't fix the cell, but you dodged the fault window. So in the Warzone, let's say, high tREFI means longer refresh intervals, which means higher fault of risk. Higher risk of fault, excuse me. And then LatencyMon running enforces a kind of a system rhythm, which could delay or serialize that faulting read. And since it's postponed, then there's no crash because it's postponed past the decay threshold. So that's one idea, right? But who's to say that LatencyMon will always be able to delay those faulting reads? Well, I mean, it's just a theory, right? And that's one of the things. You've got to allow the contrary voice here, you know? I mean, I'm floating this, but that is a question, right? I mean, that's the limitation of that theory. LatencyMon can influence the timing landscape, but it can't guarantee fault avoidance. It doesn't control memory access. It doesn't know which cells are decayed. It doesn't intercept or reroute these reads. Can't enforce these refresh cycles. What it can do is reshape the rhythm of your system. And that rhythm might by chance delay a faulting read just long enough for a refresh to occur for the read to miss the decay window. But that's a timing coincidence, right? That's not a guarantee. So it sometimes works and sometimes doesn't. Because if the faulting read is already queued, then LatencyMon can't do anything about it. If the system is under heavy load, then that synthetic loop might even be drowned out completely. And if the DRAM controller is in a vulnerable state, then even the serialized interrupts won't prevent the fault expression. So LatencyMon is a rhythm enforcer, it doesn't intercept the faults. But as a rhythm enforcer, it can be useful in postponing the faulting read. So like a traffic cop at a busy intersection, say. It's like a stoplight for interrupts and DPCs. If the faulting read is barreling toward a decayed cell, there's nothing a traffic cop can do. Get out of the way, right? But that's the theory. That's its limitation. So that's it, folks. I just wanted to make this video about LatencyMon, but I wanted to tie it in with the response that I got from you guys from the last video. And as we've planted seeds here for this community, I want to throw this theory back at you. It needs testing. I need you guys to think about times when you're crashing in games. And I'm not talking about hardware crashes. I'm talking about something that might have to do with your memory OC, or if you've implemented some latency optimizations and your shit's all fucked up because of something you did in the registry or whatever, and you're getting these crashes. Specifically, I'm especially talking about the types of crash, any crash. I want you to try running LatencyMon, see what it does. But specifically, those types of crashes that send you straight into a forced reboot. From the game to a forced reboot. I want you to try running LatencyMon, and I want you to try running it while you're gaming, and I want you to try running it also just before you're gaming, just before, during your warm-up, while you warm your system up before you start gaming. Run LatencyMon, and then stop running it and see if that has any effect on the games and whether you get a crash or not. For me, I can tell you when I ran that, no crashes at all. And then when I stopped running it, crashes until I actually fix the crash. So, but I want you guys to try this and tell me what you found, because maybe this is some idiosyncrasy of my own system. Maybe this phenomenon, while I find it totally interesting, is not replicable. Well, that's something I need to know as well, but I thought it was worth putting out to you guys, and I'm really interested to hear your feedback there. That's the 9800 X3D, folks. Spent a little bit of time today last couple days putting that together, as well as having to replace a faulty pump in my main PC. This one I'm building for a friend. This is the one I'm going to be testing. We're going to be putting this hardware to its paces. But anyway, these are all his component choices, including the 2x32, which I wouldn't have done. I wouldn't have done 64 gigs of RAM, but we're going to test this. We're going to do 2x24, 2x16, and we're going to compare the three. But before we do that testing, though, we're going to talk about case fan placement. I've been hearing this bullshit for years about how heat rises. Well, heat rises can't mean a shit when you're talking about fans pushing air around in a little box. The rules of convection can't possibly apply. But, you know, I'm going to give myself the opportunity to be wrong, because we're going to be testing that very thing. And I have 3 more fans to add to that to do some push-pull. But we're going to play around with some top intake too. And yeah, so that's going to be the basis of the next few videos. This guy right here. So we did plenty of theorizing today, and I'm definitely going to have to talk about something other than LatencyMon in the next video. We done played that one out, but I really look forward to hearing from you guys and what you found, and I'd like you to try this. Maybe we found a hack, or maybe it's as good as dog shit. I don't know, but I really look forward to hearing from you guys. Join the Discord. Support the channel if you believe in this type of content and testing shit ourselves and having fun with our hobby and discovering or rediscovering the joy of tech. This channel's for you. I'll see you in the next one.